Was it years before I saw the light of morning? The comradeship of heroes was slain. From every corner of the world came sailing the 15th International Brigade. They came to stand beside the Spanish people to try and stem the rising fascist tides. Franco's allies are the powerful and the wealthy, and Ryan's men came from the other side. Even the olives were bleeding as the battle for Madrid thundered on. Truth and hope against the force of evil, brotherhood against the fascist flag. Viva la Quinta Brigada, no passerang, the pledge that made them fight. Adelante is the cry along the hillside. Let us all remember them tonight.
Their experience, their blood and their lives, their hopes and aspirations, and they asked us for nothing. But yes, it must be said, they did want a post in battle. They aspired to the honour of dying for us. Banners of Spain, salute these many heroes. Be lowered to honour so many martyrs. Mothers, women, when the years pass by and the wounds of war are staunched, when the memory of the sad and bloody days dissipate in a present of liberty, of peace and of well-being, when the rancours have died out and pride in a free country is felt equally by all Spaniards, speak to your children, tell them of these men of the International Brigades. On the 7th of December 1938, the main body of the British battalion returned to Victoria Station in London after fighting in Spain, some of them for more than 2 years. This is a quote from a press report of the time. Led proudly by their wounded comrades, they marched into London. With them marched the spirit of Byron, the Tolpuddle Martyrs, the Chartists, Keir Hardie, Britain's bravest fighters for liberty through the centuries. Behind them and around them marched 20,000 British Democrats. Men as well as women wept and cheered. It was no political affair, for all parties were represented, both on the platform and in the crowd. It was British democracy spontaneously expressing its abhorrence of fascism and its appreciation of bravery. They had made history by forming part of the greatest international democratic army the world has ever known. They had inspired the world by their example. Something of this seemed to enter into everyone who was at Victoria Station that night, and the memory of it will never be eradicated. The men and women who fought or drove or nursed in Spain knew why they went: to make a stand for democracy against the evil of fascism, aware of the consequences for their friends and family, and indeed for the world, if it triumphed. By being here today, we keep alive the memory of those who volunteered to fight in a conflict in a country of which they knew little, but a conflict whose outcome they knew would be crucial to their own lives. We keep alive the memory of the convoy of vehicles that left George Square in September 1936, taking the Scottish ambulance unit to Spain, including Glasgow bus driver Thomas Waters, who stood on this very spot 5 years ago, just 18 months before he died. The last volunteers who went to Spain. Of the 3 double-decker buses full of volunteers who left from that same square just after Christmas later that year, and who would face death at Jarama just a few weeks later. Among them, Jimmy Maley, whose life we will remember in Motherwell tonight. We keep alive the memory because their fight, the fight against fascism, continues. Just as it reared its ugly head in depression and misery in the 1930s, it spreads and persists in despair, in Greece, in Hungary, in Ukraine, and even on our own streets today. It feeds on people's suffering and aims to set our communities against each other. We remember the Brigaders, we remember them all. We honour them all. They are history, they are legends. Viva la Repubblica! Viva las Brigades Internacionales!
Thank you so much, Mike, and I would now like to welcome Tommy Campbell, Regional Officer, United Union, and very involved in the International Brigade Memorial Trust activities.
Thanks very much for the welcome. Very proud to be here on behalf of Unite Scotland. The Union is very proud. Its General Secretary of the former Transport and General Workers Union is well known to us, was Jack Jones. I'm going to read a short poem first by Ralph Windle, written in tribute to his dad, who was an international brigadier, written 30 years ago. These are the arms of those who touch the sky, from which no time shall darken out their sun, and quicken with the blood of those who died these living hands for battles yet unwon. Here speaks at last Jarama of their knowing, all freedom's ebbed where Ebro held its line, till hold Madrid rang out upon their going, no Spanish orphan dies who is not mine. These do not die who were in love with living, enough to lose it for some other's pain. They give a world but did not count the giving, its unforgotten images of Spain. We grasp these hands no tyrant can ignore, of the quiet men of peace when roused to war. So the International Brigaders were ordinary men and women who did an extraordinary thing. They took international solidarity to a new level. Without giving it a second thought, they made their way to Spain, climbing over the Pyrenees, and some we know gave the ultimate sacrifice. And when Dolores was giving her final speech to them in Madrid on the 1st of November 1938, she said to those who were still alive and going back home that they should remember that their fallen comrades who were now buried in Spain, that the soil of Spain would ever be their shroud. In Aberdeen, where I'm based, we're very proud that we have recovered, after 50 years, a Spanish Republican Army flag that Bob Cooney had sent back from the Spanish Civil War. And on that flag was the blood of two Aberdonians who lost their lives. It was their shroud, Archie Dewar and Tom Davison. And we've now had a replica of that made. It's now on display in the library in Aberdeen, where we have an exhibition, the International Brigades Anti-Fascistas exhibition. Aberdeen's very proudly going to be holding the AGM of the International Brigade Trust next month. And I wish to commend the Hope Not Hate group here in Glasgow for organising this event, and for also agreeing that from now on there will be an annual event held in Glasgow, because we will do a similar event annually in Aberdeen, and we'll be encouraging other towns and cities in Scotland to do the same. And the reason why we'll do that is quite simple. We must always respect and honour the shining example that the International Brigaders made. And we need to follow their footsteps. Because the enemies of the people, the working class people and their organisations, castigated the International Brigaders and tried to make fun of them because they didn't win in Spain. But it was Bob Cooney in Aberdeen made the very valid political point. The defeat of Hitler and Mussolini actually started in the battlefields of Spain. The example they give shone through beyond the Second World War, when eventually democracy was returned to Spain, and eventually when fascism took hold in Chile, it was defeated as well. In the same way it will be defeated in Colombia, and in the same way fascism was defeated in Japan as well. It was defeated by people standing united together. And let's remember the role of the media who caused divisions. They are at it again, trying to get people to hate those who are suffering terrible oppression and trying to lead the country against war, against death. This is the media that encourages hatred. It wants us to hate those who are poor, and we end up with the crazy situation that those who are oppressed end up showing some affection to those who are organising the oppression. It's our duty and our responsibility and the legacy to those who fought and went before us to make sure that we continue the fight against fascism here in Scotland, in the United Kingdom and worldwide. And by doing so, we will achieve peace, democracy and socialism in our time, hopefully. Thank you very much.
I have the great pleasure of bringing Kath Campbell forward. Kath is the granddaughter of an International Brigade volunteer. She's also the coordinator of the Scottish Cuba Solidarity Campaign. With that hat, many of you know her or get emails regularly from her, but here she is to talk about her family's relationship to this crucially important struggle.
First of all, thank you very much to Greater Glasgow HOPE, not Hate, to the International Brigades Memorial Trust, and to all of those who have come along to attend today. Thanks also to the previous speakers. My grandfather, George Drever, was amongst the very last of the volunteers to go to Spain. In 1938, things were going very badly indeed in Spain. Fascist Italy were pouring troops in, and the Communist Party of Great Britain made a final appeal for volunteers for Spain, and George answered the call. He travelled from Edinburgh to London along with some comrades. When he got to London, he sent a postcard back to his mother which said, "Dear mother, going south, don't worry." She did. George was reported dead within 2 months. The death certificate sent home said, "George Drever, attached to the 57th Battalion, died as a consequence of wounds received in defence of the government of the Republic of the Peoples of Spain on the 15th of March 1928. George was 27. Back home, obituaries were published in a number of newspapers, including the Edinburgh Evening News. And there was also a report of a memorial meeting that was held a month after he died. At the memorial meeting, a postcard that George had sent to Fred Douglas, the Edinburgh Communist Party organiser, signed by Paul Robeson himself and other international brigaders, including Alec Park, who fell in Spain, whose family are here today, was auctioned to raise money for the peoples of Spain. In fact, and luckily for us, his family, his friends, and most of all for his class, George hadn't died. He had in fact been taken prisoner, and after 6 months in a variety of prisoner of war camps, in which he famously took part in a Gestapo propaganda exercise, unwillingly, he was repatriated. After returning to the UK, George struggled, as he had beforehand, to find work. As a member of the Communist Party and somebody who had served in Spain, it wasn't easy, but after the war, by the 1950s, George, his wife Kate and their 4 children, one of whom Diana is here today, settled in Glasgow, and he remained there for the rest of his life. In all his remaining years, George, the ideas and the principles and the qualities that had taken him to Spain in the 1930s continued to inform all of his actions, and he continued to serve the cause of humanity all his years. He was active in many areas, politically and socially. including, of course, the International Brigades Association. And I can remember, even as a teenager, the struggles that they had to get this memorial built and established. There were long discussions, many of which took place across the way in Carlton Place in the Trades Council Club, about how they would raise money for it, getting the support of the Glasgow City Council at the time, and where it would be situated. At one point it was going to be called the Park Zoo, I remember. George was delighted, along with the other international brigaders and their families and friends, including George's children and grandchildren, when this, in February 1980, the Lord Provost of Glasgow, David Hodge, unveiled the memorial. The family were there then. We were there on the 60th anniversary in 1996 and the rededication in 2010, and we're proud and delighted to be here again today. George's commitment to his class, to the ideas of Marxism, Leninism, to progressive causes, to international solidarity and anti-fascism never wavered. They informed all his actions, and they were passed on and shared by his children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren today. I like to think that my own small contribution in terms of working for solidarity with the peoples of Cuba, the support of the revolution and the right to self-determination is something that I know that George would have supported. My granddad and all the men and women who went to support Spain in the dark days remain an inspiration and a guide to action for all of us today. I just want to finish with words that George used himself when he wrote a tribute to a young Orkney man who'd fallen in Spain for the Arcadian newspaper in 1939. These words are from the Soviet writer Ostrovsky, who died himself during the War of Intervention in the early years of the Soviet Union. Man's dearest possession is life, and since it is granted to him to live but once, he must live as to feel no torturing regrets for years without purpose. So live as not to be scared by the shame of a cowardly and trivial past. So live that dying he can say, all my life and all my strength were given to the finest cause in the world, the fight for the liberation of humankind.
May I introduce Ryan Boyle, who is Unison Scotland Young Members Committee representative here today.
Hi Cormac, how are you doing? First off, I'd like to say thanks very much to NAB for inviting us down. It's an important part of history and a tradition to remember the contribution of the International Brigades, and I look forward to seeing it next year and many years after that. As been said by other speakers, it was ordinary men and women across these islands, the great risk to themselves, volunteered to fight against the scourge that is fascism, and against an enemy that were much stronger and much more well equipped. The threat of fascism was spread like a cancer in the European continent, and the bravery of those who stood against it should never be forgotten. I did struggle to think what I was going to say when we've got so many experienced comrades, and they'll say it far better than I will. But I then started to think about how history and the sacrifice of the Brigadiers was relevant to today's circumstances, and particularly young people. Right now we have the resurgence of fascism in Ukraine. We've got organisations like the Azov Battalion, who are an openly neo-Nazi outfit operating in Ukraine. They operate with carte blanche and licence from the state. We have the theocratic fascism of the so-called Islamic State, creating further turmoil across the Middle East and North Africa. Across Europe we see increased activity and organisation for the far right, and a general hardening of attitudes to refugees and the vulnerable. I look around at others my age and younger, and the sad truth is that many of them don't recognise the signs of a creeping drift toward the far right. They're unaware of the dangers that a xenophobic, racist and at times quite fascistic media can have in the population. They have vague misconceptions about what fascism is and how it develops. Many indulge in the scapegoat of the poor, the sick, of those from other nations and different ethnic backgrounds. Many think that fascism is consigned to the history books, that it's something far removed from them in their lives, that the things that they're saying is common sense, that we're just looking after our own. That type of thinking is pushed by organisations like Britain First, Glasgow's very own Regimental Blues, who incidentally have actually opened a drop-in centre in the East End of Glasgow. It's easy to mock organisations like them because, well, easily mockable, and it's a ridiculous argument to put forward, but we can never give them an inch. Never give them an inch, comrades. Electoral parties throughout Europe, like France's National Front, Hungary's Jobbik Party, Greece's Golden Dawn, they've all achieved some level of success in spreading their message. Social movements like Pegida, the ETL, the recent White Man March, all have seen upsurges in activity. What we're required to do is highlight the reasons for their growth, what their aims are and how we can oppose them effectively. A quote which is frequently misattributed to Lenin is that fascism is capitalism in decay. It's no surprise that when capitalism enters periods of crisis in its boom-and-bust cycle, it becomes an attractive ideology for those hit hard by economic dislocation. Many young people facing unemployment look for a reason as to why they're unemployed. The ruling class are quick to point them in the direction of immigrants, in the direction of the vulnerable, and those who have no opportunity to voice in their defence. The rampant nationalism is usually beefed up to create an artificial divide based on ethnic and or religious lines, and that's despite the working class of all nations having more in common with one another than they do with their respective ruling classes. The low level of class consciousness across society makes us all the more effective. Fascism has to be regarded as an ever-present threat. We have to know its hallmarks, and we need to educate young people in its dangers, and the International Brigades is a fantastic example of what working-class people opposed to fascism can achieve. Like the Popular Front, we have to build and maintain broad alliances across the left to oppose fascists wherever they rear their head. But more than that, we need to show the support, and that goes materially for the vulnerable people who are on the receiving end of that hate. We must dismantle the arguments that fascists put across, which is never very difficult, as I said, but they are often quite prevalent. As history shows us, when under severe threat, big business and capitalist interests will always side with fascist elements. The mainstream media, which is almost wholly owned by big business, is used as a mouthpiece, and as I said, to make these arguments prevalent and appear as the right and simple answer. In contrast, our arguments can appear more complex, and they're also much more difficult to get out, but they are the right ones, comrades. Only by mobilising and building on political education and developing that class consciousness can we do it effectively. This is what happened with international brigades. They saw through the lies and misinformation of the state, and off their own back, as internationalists and in solidarity, came to the aid of their brothers and sisters in Spain. It's a proud part of our history, and it's something that should be commemorated always. Long live the international brigades.
And now we have Mike Cowley representing the Scottish People's Assembly to join us. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, comrades. I'm very proud, I feel very privileged actually to be here to speak on behalf of the Scottish People's Assembly, and I thank Hope Not Hate and the other organisers. I hope to use the few minutes that I've got to speak a wee bit about the kind of courage and the selflessness and solidarity that so moved many hundreds of ordinary working class Scots, youth and intellectuals to volunteer for the Brigades, and which can still be found, that kind of courage and movements with similar ambition around the world today. These stories exposes lies, the cynicism of those who would have the pursuit of atomised atomised and individual ends as almost the natural order of things. In fact, it's thanks to the very heroic efforts of the volunteers that we honour today that we have as historical record evidence that ordinary people, sometimes in the most difficult and dangerous of circumstances, can demonstrate solidarity, selflessness, and the kind of acts that would put the authorities and our governments to shame. In fact, in the words of Councillor Tom Murray, Commissar of the British Battalion Machine Gun Company, I returned from Spain feeling that I'd seen demonstrated the finest qualities that human beings possess, and I've more respect than ever for the majesty of that human being. And these volunteers too were driven by necessity. We forget the poverty that existed in those days, as well as conviction. As volunteer Tommy Bloomfield noted, an empty stomach made an empty head think. Also, I'm very pleased to see a range of young artists here today. Arthur Johnson, Callum Baird, Paul Sheridan and Stephen Wright. There was many artists, of course, who were inspired by the vision of the Republican government. People like Orwell, Hemingway, W.H. Auden and of course Garcia Lorca fell by a fascist firing squad. And it's wonderful to see these young people today reassuring that their machines are still killing fascists in the 21st century. We see this courage too in events like the Arab Spring, where the Al Khwaja sisters in Bahrain, to name but three, inspired by their father, organised against a feudal monarchy, not that far removed from the kind of power that the phalangists thought right and just to murder their fellow citizens to defend. And today the initiative and courage of ordinary people once again puts our governments to shame. As people flee war and poverty across the Middle East and beyond, ordinary people fill warehouses with goods and fling their doors open to welcome these people, even as their governments denounce the most desperate of humanity and erect police lines and barbed wire to deny them access to the most simple and basic of human needs. And our governments are shamed again by the courage of those refugees. Again, a reflection not unlike those volunteers going to Spain to fight for a vision and for a better life. We see a movement of humanity coming away from war zones traceable to the neglect and the culpability of Western governments. We also see the corollary of that courage in the rise of Golden Dawn and other fascist organisations around Western Europe. Again, our governments complicit in that rise. They're the third largest organisation in Greece as Greek people go to the polls. Here we find an echo down the decades of European difference and culpability in regards to fascist insurgency. For once Spain was left isolated and exposed to Hitler's bombs and Mussolini's bombs, so the people of Greece, determined on an anti-austerity trajectory and course, have been betrayed by the neoliberals and thrown to the wolves of poverty and political diktat. I'd like to close with a couple of words from Orwell's Homage to Caledonia. Orwell would leave the front, as we know, wounded by a fascist bullet, but not disillusioned nor cynical as the other speakers have said, but in his own words, more convinced than ever about the essential decency of human beings. More than that, he came back from Spain with a living foretaste of the possibility of another world, a world we are told is impossible and utopian, dangerous and even, in the words of our current government, a threat to national security. Orwell said the things that attract ordinary men to socialism and makes them willing to waste their skins for it is the idea of equality. To the vast majority of people, socialism means a classless society, or it means nothing at all. And it was here that those few months in the militia were invaluable to me. For the Spanish militias, while they lasted, were a sort of microcosm of a classless society. In that community, where no one was on the make, where there was shortage of everything, but no privilege and no bootlicking, one got, perhaps, a forecast of what the opening stages of socialism might look like. This is the world we're fighting for, brothers and sisters, the world that the volunteers risked and sacrificed their lives for, knowing, as we know, that it's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees and allow tyrants to flourish. It's their sacrifice, but more importantly, their vision of a world free of inequality, injustice, poverty and unaccountable power that we honour today. Thank you.